All right, so the final question obviously comes to whether you're going to index or not index, right? And certainly we want to make use of the tool of indexing, but just don't go crazy with it, right? There's a lot of things you need to consider, depending on how is it you want to search. Is it actually going to improve performance, and also the added complexity that entails adding indices, right? It actually could if you have too many indices, it might actually work against you, right? One of the things that you need to consider is that for every time you do an index, right, there's a new copy of that data that is being maintained, that the database system has to maintain, needs to update, it needs to re-index, right? So, for instance, if you have the original table might be 8 GB. If you're going to do the index on the primary key, right, you're going to have to keep track of the original 8 GB. Each copy that you make will be smaller than the original one. You'll have just probably just that field where you're indexing, plus some added information that allows you to navigate to the original record. But they're not insignificant amounts of data, right? You need to for any additional index that you might have, you're just making copies of the original data. Certainly smaller, but they're not insignificant. So yeah, you have to make sure that that you're willing to deal with this, right? Now, obviously, for most arguments is that data's cheap, storage is cheap, so who cares, right? But when you consider that in large enterprise application, you might have a lot of environments that you have to maintain, right? Not only your local development environment, but eventually this needs to be the data needs to be migrated up to higher level environments, such as user acceptance testing for performance, or eventually to productions. And in each one of them, you might have indices that you have to maintain, that have to be copied and need to be copied over for disaster recovery. That you need to have several of these copies all across for different mirroring and for performance. So it becomes non-trivial to keep track of all these copies, right? Also, depending on the operations that you're making, right? If you have no indices, here's a couple of statistics that how long would it take you to do updates, right? If you do an update, if you're doing just reads, then certainly indices are great, right? But if you have a transactional database where you are updating values, you're deleting and inserting. Every time you do a change in the database, you need to re-index the database, right? So we have to make sure that. Wait a minute, I lost. My AirPods just died. Okay, so we have to make sure that that every time we do an insert or an update in the database, it's non-trivial, right? The table needs to be re-indexed, right? And so it becomes slower and slower if you have more indexes on the table. That all these indices need to recalculate every time you do an update, right? So if you have no indices, then here's an example that you could do 100 updates, okay? If you have just one index, you can do 65 updates with 100,000 records, or you can do 22 updates or 15 updates if you have third index. So notice that it's exponentially going down your performance, if you're doing a lot of updates, right? So you got to be careful with that. So yeah, it's not trivial that you're just gonna index everything. Okay? You got to be careful.